notice was properly given. Said notice having been transmitted to the Courier News and Star Ledger on Wednesday, January 9th, 2019, as well as posting on the bulletin board in the city clerk's office. Clerk, may I have a roll call?
Council members Amadi.
Here.
Davis.
Present.
Good. Present.
McCray.
Present. Storch. Here. Vice President Hockaday.
Here.
And Council President Mills Ransom has noted that she is away on vacation. So we have 6 members present in our quorum. The Council Vice President will be acting in the place of the President this evening.
Thank you. Clerk, do we have any communications from the mayor?
Yes. His Honor, the Mayor, Adrian O'Mac, has submitted the following nominees for advice and consent from the governing body. Director Kenny Childress as the Plainfield Emergency Management Coordinator, and Charles Walter Weltner to the Plainfield Shade Tree Commission.
Okay, thank you. The bills list and other financial documents have been sent to the council via email. All right, there's no discussion action items or this unfinished business. The PMUA will be at our October 15th meeting for a discussion. We'll open it up for public comments. We'll be limited to resolutions and ordinances being considered this evening. Each speaker will be given a total of 3 minutes. The floor is now open. Seeing none. I have a motion to close public comments.
So be it. Second.
Okay. Public comments is now closed. MC 2019-25 and Bond 1268 are scheduled for public hearing and second reading on October 15th, 2019 as advertised. Are there any questions from council on these ordinances? Seeing no questions, do we have consensus to move this to the agenda?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Are there any questions on resolutions A?
Yes.
Okay.
So the recommendation in the audit that city funds be deposited within 48 hours is not a new recommendation for the audit. So what measures are the administration taking to make sure that this actually happens?
Each of the 3 departments that were acknowledged or recognized during the audit have submitted plans that talk about having additional attention to detail with checks and balances usually at the end of each and every day to ensure that those checks get deposited by the end of the day, if not the first thing the next morning.
So from a macro level, what is going to happen to ensure that those corrective action plans are being followed?
Well, I'm also supposed to be alerted each and every time that there is a deposit that's late. So that I will then be following up directly with the department heads
Thank you.
if something doesn't happen correctly.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Do we have consensus to add this to the agenda?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. Are there any questions for resolutions B through D?
Yes.
Councilwoman Davis?
So resolution C, I think I have questions and comments on that. So I did receive an email in regards to an incident with Mr. Weltner and another, a member of another board, of the planning board. So my question to the administration is, are they aware of the incident? What measures have they taken?
I'm happy to answer that. Councilwoman, it seems that you raise an incident between an individual and a planning board member as if somehow the administration had some responsibility for that in any way. This was an action that was brought to our attention. I understand that the individual has addressed it with the planning board member. This is not something that the administration has any responsibility to, other than to make sure that everyone feels safe. but to couch it in such a way as if it's administration's responsibility, I think is incorrect.
Oh, so I'm sorry, that wasn't the way that I wanted to present it. I just wanted to know if the administration had been aware of it. And I think that I was wondering about the administration's response because the mayor is putting it up for advice and consent. And it's concerning to me because every day in society, women are harassed and attacked for simply not saying hello to a man. So I'm not sure, so we don't always have the privilege of wondering what people's intentions are when they approach us, especially that late night. So I just want to make sure that anybody who the administration puts up, they are a reflection of the administration because you're putting them up for advice and consent. It's not really, so the question wasn't really about whether or not the administration has a responsibility, but you know, were they aware of the situation and what they were going to do moving forward? And I guess withdrawing it the first time and now representing it is the answer?
No, there's no, the nomination has been put forward and is now in the hands of the council. I think everyone has the information that's been provided, and ultimately the administration and mayor's position is that it is up for advice and consent, and the council will ultimately have to make that decision on this appointment. And it is before you this evening, and hopefully there'll be discussion and ultimately a decision from council on whether or not they want to move forward with this. Thank you.
So is there any other discussion regarding B, C, or D?
I too received the email, I'm pretty sure my colleagues have as well, and I am very concerned about that. So I just wanted to say that for the record.
I support Mr. Weltner for this nomination. This last email from the other person involved in this incident just came to my attention. I think probably it's very recent, like in the last, I saw it last night for the first time. And I don't want to just close the door on this. I think it's a sensitive issue and there's always two sides to an issue. So I would recommend that we withdraw this from the agenda to give the council more time to sort out what's happening, because I do think this is a person who deserves to be considered, and I think the council deserves more time to process the new information.
I would wholeheartedly disagree with Councilman Storch. This individual, I happened to be there that evening and was partaking of that process. This individual, we put people on boards to do a job for us, and for anyone from the public to approach that individual and make them feel uncomfortable in any way is totally inappropriate. Also, that evening, I was also called a planted tree by individuals who were up there protesting that decision that was going to be made. So there is no excuse, nor is there an apology after you've already intimidated or tried to intimidate a commissioner. And we as council people must protect our people that we put on boards to do a job for the city.
Thank you, Councilman.
Just in response, I do think that the questions that Mr. Weltner raised were legitimate, but I think the way that he raised them were clearly questionable, and I know for a fact that he's offered a sincere, I believe, a sincere apology. And I do think that in the political world or the world of municipal government and civics, that people lose their temper. And if every person that lost their temper was not allowed to serve their community, especially if they apologize for their behavior, I think there'd be a whole lot less people, probably even in this room, who would be serving on the council and in other appointed and elected positions. So I'm not going to be so quick to condemn anybody for their behavior. I do think we want to look at each case individually and not make a blanket judgment.
So in response to Councilman Storch, I think that actions have consequences, and I think that we can absolutely table it, to hear both, well, before I say that, can we table it? And what would be the mechanism to, even if we decided to hear both sides, is there even a mechanism for that?
I can answer that, Councilwoman. Not tonight, there is no way to table it. If this was added to the agenda, it could be tabled at the regular meeting. Tonight is only for the purposes of consensus. Any item that needs to be added to the agenda requires a majority of the full body to be added to the agenda, so it would require 4 votes. If there are not 4 votes, the item is not moved to the agenda, and the individual will not receive advice and consent.
So, I guess the second part of that question, if we did move it to the agenda and ultimately we decided to table that, is there a mechanism for this body to, I guess, investigate or get to the bottom of what happened with this situation? Because simply tabling it for another time never gets us to a solution to even find out what happened so we can get to the advice and consent.
Council always has the ability to review matters or investigate matters if they so desire as a body. It will also, and once again, require consensus. You need 4 votes to do that, but that's certainly something that a council can do.
Okay, and to address the second part of Councilman Storch's statement, I don't think we simply have to accept people's apologies because they offer them in a sincere manner. As I said when we first started, that women don't have the privilege of figuring out what people's intentions are when they walk up on them, when we have various examples of women getting attacked for simply not speaking back to somebody, or simply not saying hello, or simply not giving a man attention that they feel that they deserve or want. So I don't think that the other person involved in this incident has to accept that apology simply because somebody says that they offer their sincere apology. Like I said in the beginning, actions have consequences, and we have a town of 50,000 people. Your actions have consequences, and we can absolutely, if we choose to, not have people because of their behaviors and because of them losing their temper, because we have 50,000 people to choose from to appoint to these boards and commissions. So I think it's for the public that anytime, any of your actions, they have consequences. If you want to sit on a board and commission, we should be holding them to a certain standard. People hold us elected officials to a certain standard. We hold the administration to a certain standard when they interact with the public. So why are we holding our boards and commissioners and potential boards and potential commissioners to these boards to those same standards? So, yeah, that's it.
All right, thank you. So given that most of the discussion was for item C, I'm going to take these separately. Do we have consensus to add B to the agenda?
Yes.
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 Okay. All right. I'll do a roll call for C.
So roll call for consensus to add C to the agenda. Council members Omani?
No.
Davis?
Yes.
Good?
To table?
No, this is
To add to the agenda, because then we can go to the next part of investigating if necessary.
Okay, fine.
Good?
I would say yes. Let me go back.
No.
McCray?
No.
Storch?
I'll say no with the intention of asking a majority of the council to bring this back.
And Vice President Hockaday?
no.
Does not have consensus.
Do we have consensus to add D to the agenda?
Yes.
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 Thank you. Does the Corporation Council have any items to be considered this evening?
Yes, thank you, Council Vice President. I have one item, based on our discussion in executive session. I asked the council to add a resolution authorizing an appropriation to the law firm of Ruderman and Roth for $45,000.
Is that,
Just ask for consensus on that one item. That's, yes.
do we have consensus for that item?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, Council Vice President.
You're welcome. Is that it? Council Corporation Council?
That's it.
Would the Department of Finance present their items?
Department of Finance has 5 items up for consideration this evening, items E through I. Are there any questions?
Yes, on item E, if the local finance board does not approve this application, what are our options?
We would be required to find funds without being able to go to the bond market. So we would look at surplus and other avenues available to us to be able to handle it.
And if we use surplus, would we then save all the fees and interest payments related to a bond?
I would tell you that fees and interest payments aren't the things that we would look at. The thing that would be of consideration to us is the impact on the taxpayers. And so our concern is more about being able to spread the cost out over years. That's one of the reasons you go to a local finance board, so you're gonna get, if they vote yes, we have the ability to spread payments out over the course of several years, whether it's 3 years or 5 years as opposed to 1 year. And so our intent is not to look at the, in the monies that are being looked at, there's $10,000 for soft cost versus $590,000. So I think that when we look at that, the concern is far more about the impact on the average household.
So,
Oh.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
But how would it work if we looked for surplus? And I ask that question because for, I would say most years, certainly in recent years, when we look at the administration's budgets submission, when we hand the budget over to the council in the springtime, the expenditure reports always show a significant underspending. And in fact, I went through it myself. I found $500,000, and I didn't even go into salaries and wages. That was just other expenses. So we ultimately, as a body, voted to not make those reductions in those underspent budget lines. But theoretically, we could go to those budget lines and find the $500,000, couldn't we?
First and foremost, there are two things going on. We have an emergency appropriation, which is also one of the agenda items. The reason for the emergency appropriation is that these items were not in the budget. So we're not authorized to just spend money on something that was not appropriated. So we have to have appropriation approval first and foremost. Then how we pay for it is a secondary matter.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm questioning how we pay for it, not whether it's an emergency appropriation.
What I would tell you is that one of the things we've done for the last 5 years is contribute anywhere from $5.5 million to $6.5 million into the budget from surplus to minimize the impact on taxpayers. If we take it out of surplus, that's $600,000 not available to put back into the budget for next year. And this year was a very challenging budget experience. I expect next year will be too. So we need to regenerate $6.5 million or more to be able to contribute into next year's budget. That's what we're trying to get to. And so if we find available unspent dollars, that's part of what I would call good budgeting. And just know that we have $6.6 million that we've been contributing for the last couple of years. And if we didn't put it in there or didn't have that amount of money, we'd have to find $6.6 million worth of cuts and or
Raise taxes.
or taxes.
So are we thinking about looking at our budget for next year in terms of what we bond for? Because I know we're bonding for between $3 and $4 million in roads, and when you add all the other equipment, it seems like we're putting forward $5 or $6 million a year in new debt. So is it possible, if we're going to bond for this, is the administration considering cutting back our budget for capital expenses so that we don't go over what we normally would spend?
That has not been a consideration yet, because one of the other things that's on the flip side is we have to invest in infrastructure. And provide the teams with the tools that they need to get their jobs done. So, one of the things I would tell you is we've got over $50 million of bonding power. But when we go out to the debt market, we do look at the interest costs and everything else. And one of the things that resulted from us refinancing several months ago is that we're gonna save in excess of $1 million, in future interest payments. So we're forever looking at what's in the best interest of the city. We will continue to do that because, if we don't do that and we aren't prudent with the management of money, then the impact is on the taxpayer.
So I just say to my colleagues, because I'm not going to be sitting here in 2020, that you look very carefully at next year's budget, and I know we probably look more closely at the operating budget than we do at the capital budget, but I think it behooves us to look very carefully at the capital budget, because yes, you can justify every single item that we've discussed this year and next year, but you also have to look at the big picture, and the big picture is the taxes that each homeowner is paying is just forcing people to leave town. I mean, that's a fact. So I think the council needs to draw a line somewhere, because everything can be justified, but not everything can be afforded.
I just have a follow-up question. So Director, do you know, like with interest and all, how much this was gonna cost in the long run? And how many years are we talking with this bond?
I don't have the interest cost, I didn't project it out doing that. What I can tell you is that the impact on an average homeowner, if we did 1 year finance, 1 year hit would be $53.71 per household. If we spread it out over 3 years, it's $17.91. If it's over 5 years, $10.75 is the impact.
And what is the administration considering at this point?
We would love for the local finance board to tell us we can go out to 5 years. That will be determined by them. But at a minimum, we would like to see 3 years.
Thank you.
What is the longest line that you can? 5, okay.
For emergency,
Right.
special emergency appropriation.
So, Mr. West, you said that we have money in surplus to go back into the budget where necessary.
There's a budget line called surplus. You can't just move it into the budget because you approved the budget. This is now an emergency appropriation, something unanticipated. So this now has to be approved, not just by this body, but also by the local finance board, to now add $600,000 to the budget.
Okay, so the first step would be us approving the resolution for emergency appropriations. The second step would be the finance board approving it. So then the bond would come in at the third step.
That's correct.
So, okay, I got that. But we have a surplus in our budget right now, currently.
Correct.
So if we already,
No, we have a surplus.
so we have a surplus. So if we follow steps 1 and step 2, so we did the emergency appropriation, we then went to the local finance board, they approved it. Will we then be able to take the money out of the surplus if necessary to put it into, how does that work?
That's an option. I can tell you right now that there are expectations that payments will be made against what's owed under the emergency appropriation. So we would look to get them paid before there's ever a bond ordinance in effect. So we're gonna have to pay for them out of surplus. Then we would put it back into an emergency bond. But our intent is not to lower surplus by $600,000 and not have that available to us to use for next year's budget.
So, okay, so if we did take it out the surplus, we would then have to get that money back through raising taxes anyway?
Taxes, the numbers that I gave you in terms of the impact, that's an increase to the budget. I'm netting for you what the impact is to the average household of this. Forget how we're financing it. This is $600,000 that's not in the budget today.
Right, I got that part. So I guess my question is about the financing of it. So what happens if the market changes while we still have these bonds? Is that like gonna negatively affect us? How does all of that work?
Again, can't predict the market for you. I can tell you that we just had a win when we refinanced, several months ago, and we're gonna save over $1 million in interest. It's just hard to predict where it's going. I would tell you that it would be our expectation that we would be able to, at least today, continue to get a good interest rate. Rates have dropped even lower since we refinanced. So the expectation is that now, at this point in time, we'd be able to get a competitive rate. But we would initially treat this with short-term note financing, and that's also very competitive. So we would expect that the interest costs would be competitive, and one of the reasons we have to continue to get a good rating from Moody's and others is that helps us lower our interest costs. So the better we perform, the lower the interest costs that we have to pay when we go to market. So everything that we do, to improve the city is a plus. When outside entities look at us and decide whether or not it's worth them investing in this city.
I think what taxpayers can care most about is that their taxes are stabilized. So just talk about the advantages and disadvantages of us taking it directly out of the surplus versus bonding it, and what is the immediate impact to tax holders?
Tax holders is $53.71 is the impact on the increase in budget as you look going forward.
And that's if it was taken out of surplus or bonding?
Surplus and with a 1 year, I'll call it financing. If it's spread over 3 years, it's $17.91. If it's spread over 5 years, it's $10.75 is the impact on the taxpayer.
So essentially the answer is by bonding it, we get, there's less of an impact to our taxpayers.
Plus we retain surplus to help us make a contribution into next year and future budgets.
Got it.
So the impact is $50 so the impact is about $50 to the average taxpayer, whether we do it over 3 years, over 5 years, over 1 year, that's still $50.
It's great.
No, I thought I heard if we do not finance it over multiple years, it's going to be $54 hit.
Yes.
Right, and then you
If he does it
said
over 5 years,
it's
it's
$10 a
$11
year.
rounding. And if he does it over 3 years, it's $18.
right, and all those things still equal to about the same.
No,
So
no.
$11.
It's one or the other. It's one or the other. It's not all, it's not compounded.
It's not divided over the years. They're not taking $53 and dividing it over 5 years.
I got you. You said it's $11 per year for 5 years. That's $55. $17 over 3 years is still about $50. And then you said 1 year it's going to be $50.
See, as you look over the years, the other thing that you have to take into consideration is that we have other things going on in the city that will generate additional revenue. So you've got all of your economic development initiatives that will start hitting the books, and other things that will help to offset, those kinds of increases. So what we're trying to do is delay the impact today on the taxpayer and spread it out so that we have other things coming, forward that will help us better balance the budget. Yes, we all want a stable budget, but it's going to take a while because remember, 80% of our hit is based on property owners, homeowners today. So we've got to get more commercial and industrial properties that are yielding revenues in town so that we can increase their percentage of tax paying as opposed to the homeowners. But we need a lot of things to happen, and that's what we're trying to work on when you start talking about long-term strategies. And so what time, what time does is give us more time to get more things done and find other sources of income to even offset what we do with regard to surplus. You find $6 million of new money, that we don't have to take out of surplus, that can go to lower the budget.
Okay,
Lower taxes.
so I'm just gonna talk this through again. Everybody just give me a moment. So, if we don't, so the average hit to the homeowner is about $53 to $55. And that's 1 year. Over the course of 3 years, it's $17 per year. which equals $50. Over the course of 5 years, it's $11 per year, which equals $55. But we're hoping that in that 3-year and that 5-year period, we have more businesses come to offset the taxes, so then it may not necessarily be $50 per household over 3 and 5 years.
That's correct.
So, the same way we don't know what may happen to the market, we don't know if we'll have those rateables in 3 to 5 years, so it'll still be about $55.
There are those of us that would disagree with you. We're certain, this city is certainly banking on having additional rateables out 3 and 5 years, out a year. So, no, we're truly banking on that.
So, okay, hold on, before you go. So, we're banking on having additional rateables next year. So that $50 can still be offset if we have enough rateables for next year.
From my perspective, if you spread out the hit on a homeowner, it's better than getting them all up front with that. That's just the logic. And over the course of time, we want to definitely find additional revenue opportunities so that, again, we get to stable taxes a lot faster. And so, again, this isn't something that we planned for. That's why it's an emergency appropriation.
Mr. West, would you say we're delaying the inevitable?
We're spreading out the hit.
Delaying the inevitable.
I would say we're not delaying the inevitable. What I would say is that the projects that come online next year and the following year bring in additional revenue. So let's say Muhlenberg is completed next year. Let's say it's completed in September. It's not going to start generating those new taxes, those increase in taxes until September. So what he's saying to you is in the second year that Muhlenberg is operating, they would contribute taxes that would offset single-family homeowner taxes. The same with the Quinn. We had a groundbreaking and it's October, so the Quinn, the first building is going to have very little impact on tax revenue this year, but next year it will have an impact on tax revenue generated. And then the second building probably won't have an impact until 2021. So those are the kind of numbers, we know that those things are going to come online
So
and
the
generate
numbers-
additional revenue.
The numbers would change over a period of time.
So,
And that's why he's saying delay, because you may not have to hit the taxpayer with the $17,
Right.
because we will have increased revenue.
Gotcha.
Okay.
so,
Families that are struggling to pay their bills don't want a sharp increase in their taxes, from year to year, or in one particular year. They'd rather spread it out and give the city an opportunity to maybe not pay that increase.
But I do
So
have a
bonding seems to give us an increase, the ability to do that.
So Director Jackson, I think it's good that, all the economic development we're seeing, we're anticipating more revenue. Do we know, like, how much we're talking about? Like a general estimation, like, so that, that the public is aware of how much we're anticipating.
Ron asks me that question all the time, so I get it just practically every day. And so it depends on a number of factors. So I anticipate, I've given him some projects from Moody Report that tells him anticipated revenue. Now the impact may be slightly off in terms of when these projects come online. So there are a lot of factors that affect them. But the projects that we are talking about is the 90 units on South 2nd Street, the Muhlenberg, the 120 units that are being built now. We're talking about the Quinn that's being built now. We will not see revenue for 829 South Avenue, which we had a groundbreaking for in 2020, but we will see it in 2021. I do put together some charts, some information for Ron, but we try to definitely look at when the revenue is going to hit and in what year. So it's very important that we look at that.
Thank you. I'm going to ask that we wrap this up and give council members one additional question if they wanted to ask them, starting with Councilman Storch.
Yeah, since we're talking about the increases, which I'm looking forward to, if we get like an estimation of the negative number, which is the loss of revenues from tax appeals. I know that's been a high number lately, and I'm hoping that it's started to subside. Do we know when that's going to change? And because these things will offset each other.
Yes, they will.
So any comments, Mr. West, on what the trend is for the tax appeal losses?
I can't speak for the people. I can just tell you that the tax appeals this year were 300. 2 years ago, there were 500. So we're certainly seeing the number of tax appeals go down. But you have seen a couple of commercial folks. I don't know what people are going to do. We won't have a good sense for that until April of next year, which is the cutoff date.
Councilman Ahmadi?
Director, White, just so that we're clear, is it safe to assume that, if an item wasn't, how do I want to say, appropriated within the budget, we always would have to go through bonds to pay for anything that's unanticipated?
This one was a special emergency appropriation, so in those situations, the answer is truly yes.
Okay, like if we had another Superstorm Sandy, we did not have the money, that's how we pay for it?
Even that, I think, was handled under special, and FEMA provided some funding downstream for that, so that cities could get out from under
Okay,
the impact.
thank you.
Councilman Good, any questions?
No, thank you, Director Jackson and Director West, I appreciate you.
Councilman McCray? Councilwoman Davis?
Yes. So, by the logic presented by Director Jackson and Mr. West, if we spread it out over time, it's our hope that these projects we have now become ratables and start paying, so then the impact is less to the taxpayers. But we're not even sure when those projects are going to start putting money into the budget. So potentially, we can still have taxpayers still paying this approximately $55, whether it's in 1 year or 3 years or 5 years. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So we're not sure when the ratables come, but we're hoping that we have enough ratables to come to offset that $55 over the course of 3 years or 5 years. But if it doesn't come, the taxpayers will still have to pay the same $55, whether they paid in 1 year or 3 years or 5 years. Is that basically the whole premise?
Well, we know for sure if we do it in 1 year, they pay the $55 in that 1 year. What we don't know for sure is how much of it they will pay in the second and the third and the fourth and the fifth. But we do know that there will be new revenue. But as Councilman Storch has pointed out, we do balance that with tax appeals. But we know for sure if we do it in year 1 and 1 year only, they're going to pay $55 per taxpayer.
So, sorry, I'm taking Councilman McCray's question since
No,
he
you can't
asked,
take my
but,
question. I do not yield my question.
it's all right.
Okay. I have just one follow-up question. I know you said you had $50 million in bonding power. How much of that are
Additional bonding.
additional bonding power? Okay, so we have that total $50 million that we're able to.
We can raise $100 million.
Wow.
So I do have a question that's pertinent to
Go ahead.
the rule. So do we know how much these projects are going to be, the amount of revenue these projects are bringing into the city? The Quinn, all the South 2nd Street, all of those projects, do we know approximately what that revenue number is?
Yes, that's in the financial agreements that we asked council to adopt. It has first year anticipated, it anticipates the revenue, the incremental revenue for over the 30-year period.
So have we taken that into account in this calculation of the bond? Like, so if we know the Quinn is supposed to give us $10 million or whatever a number, I'm just making up a number, have we taken that into account in spreading this number out across the 5 years?
No, this is an emergency appropriation. We are only looking at the emergency appropriation. Now, right behind that, we are working on the budget. So we will be looking at the budget, in short order, and looking at everything. The emergency appropriation and the anticipated needs for 2020, and looking to minimize taxes.
All right, do we have consensus to add the finance items to the agenda?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Would the fire department present their items?
Yes, the fire department has two resolutions, J and K. Any questions?
Yes, I have a question. So this question kind of predates you, but in the budget hearings, we were talking about the need for the sets of fire protection gear. With this purchase of 26 sets, are we at the goal of how much we needed, or are we only like a fraction of the way? Like, how much does this 26 sets of new fire gear help us, I guess?
Well, eventually all the units have to be replaced. They have 10 years life on them. So right now we're only replacing 26 sets. And going forward, we'll replace each year, we'll appropriate more money to replace the other sets.
So the 26 sets, is that like one firehouse, or like how much is that in terms of?
Well, let's just say out of 100 people, it's 26 sets.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Pardon me, Councilman Storch, would you like to go ahead?
No,
Director, just briefly, could you explain a little bit, maybe the public might be curious as well, what an escape system is?
The safety system is a unit that the firefighters wear, in which they can rappel from a building safely to the bottom or to a lower floor out of harm. So they would use it to escape from, let's say, a 7-story building. They would use it to escape down to the 3rd or 4th floor. It's fully feet long.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Storch?
on the same piece of equipment, like what cities or towns have that equipment now, and what are you hearing about its use?
Almost all fire departments have that equipment. Hopefully it never gets used, but it's a necessary item for them to have. There's no records of how many firefighters have used it, but they have to have it.
Okay, do we have consensus to add these items to the agenda?
Yes.
Okay. Can the Department of Public Works present their agenda items?
Good evening, council members. The Department of Public Works has 7 items. The agenda, letters L to R. Any questions?
Councilman Storch?
Item M, the South Avenue traffic study, could you define the boundaries of that? I know that's been, isn't that the road, part of which is a dispute with the state as to who owns it?
Yes, it's part of this is around 28, of course. Yep, we're looking to do that. We're doing an impact study, which will help us. This study will help us get grant funding for this project, and it's part of. It goes from Hamilton to Plainfield Avenue, 5th Street, down to the end. I'll just give you the streets. It goes from Plainfield Avenue down to West Front Street, Hamilton Avenue to Plainfield Avenue, and West Front to 5th Street. 3 parts, 3.5 miles of roadway that's going to be done on Route 28. We're putting
Does it go all the way to Terrell or Leland?
No, we're not, again, we have to take a certain section at a time to do this. So this is a portion we took, where roads were around for shape to take care of.
Okay, the Front Street section,
Yes.
isn't that the section that's owned by the state, or am I?
This is all state, this is all Route 28, part of the state, yes. This is all state funding that we're applying for.
No, I mean the road itself. The state's position on at least part of this road, if not all of it, is that Plainfield owns it and it's our responsibility to pave it. Our position, Mayor Mapp's position, was that he wanted the state to take it back so we wouldn't have to pay for the paving.
Right, but for now, we can't take it back, so the compromise is for us to apply for this freight grant funding so we can repair it, the curbing and everything.
Okay, so that's the purpose of this grant, is to
Correct.
position ourselves for grant funds.
Correct. All grant funds under NJDOT.
Thank you.
Question.
Councilman Bennett?
Let us know, I believe we discussed it maybe in a previous meeting, when phase 1 of the Rushmore will begin. think I remember, I think you said
Well-
first of the year?
No, we're applying for grant funding for this. This is all through the grant funding for this. This is just the beginning stages for the design of the project through engineering.
Okay, so when is phase one going to be into effect?
Once the grant funding becomes available to us, which hopefully will be soon.
Okay, all right, thank you. You don't know when though?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Cray? Any questions? Councilman Davis?
Yes, I have a question on letter Q. So I'm happy to see the Division of Parks and Recreation opening up inclusive swim lessons to people with disabilities, specifically people with autism. But in the application, it says that we're gonna have people certified who work with that population. Are we sending staff for training? Are we going to outsource to get that certified staff? How exactly are we going to address that?
Well, the job like that Ms. Taylor does, we'll have certified folks that she'll have trained with inside to get the work done, that can handle this job. I think we have some people that are certified now, that may be required to do this work, certified staff.
I mean, I know we have certified lifeguards, but working with children with, well, not even children, but people with disabilities or special needs may require a specific certification. Are we going to?
To answer the question, Councilman, yes, we will. We'll get them certified to address this issue, yes, in advance, yes.
Have we already identified where they would get that training from, or is that going to be further?
That's for that before looked at, and that's the conversation I'll have with Ms. Taylor to address. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, do we have consensus to add these items to the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Would the Department of Health and Social Services present their items?
Good evening. Department of Health and Social Services presents 3 items, letters S, T, and U. Are there any questions?
Councilman Storch?
No.
Councilman O'Malley?
No.
Councilman Good?
No.
Councilman McCray?
No.
And Councilwoman Davis?
Director Brown, for the benefit of the public, can you just explain letter S on the agenda?
Right. So we have what's called a CHAP program, Comprehensive Housing Assistance Program, which works to help individuals who are low to moderate income do repairs in their house. So the maximum, we're essentially serviced as a bank. And so what the consultant does is all those items that you would do if you were pursuing a mortgage or refinancing, that person does, that organization does us because we don't really have the capacity to do it. Our loans are up to it's actually $24,999. Anywhere down, we anticipate servicing 11 to 15 households with $266,000. The consultants do all that information gathering for us.
Have we used consultants in the past to
Always.
do this? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have consensus to add these items to the agenda?
Yes.
Will the administration please present their ordinances submitted for consideration?
There are 3 ordinances identified, 26, 27, and bond 1269. Do we have any questions from the council?
Councilman Storch?
For ordinance 26, could the administration please explain what's all the changes from the original to the proposed plan amendment, the plan?
The proposed plan amendments really are addressing some of the changes that were put in place because of New Jersey DEP requirements. So the elevation for some of the buildings put it up from the sidewalk. And so mixed use doesn't make as much sense as previously conceived. And so it allows for residential on the ground floor or above the parking. And it also allows for some light industrial uses in certain parts of North Avenue. So we're really talking about North Avenue and that transit-oriented development plan. And so again, it allows for residential above parking or on the ground floor. It allows for some light industrial uses. There is still a lot of industrial activity on North Avenue.
I noticed from the amended plan that the requirement for, I think it was at least 15% of the usable space be retail or some kind of commercial, but I think it was actually retail, right?
Right,
First floor, and that provision is eliminated from what I read.
yes.
So what is there a new provision with a minimum amount of light industrial or commercial space?
There is no minimum provision for retail in the plan anymore. There is no provision for minimal in light industrial. It allows it as a permitted use, and it allows for all residential buildings. So it doesn't prevent anyone from doing a mixed-use building, but the likelihood of a person doing a building where you would have to walk up the stairs to commercial for retail, it's probably highly unlikely. People will drive up the incline and the ramp to parking and park from the rear, even though the residential building will have a front door on North Avenue.
So the change actually adds residential units, because it's replacing some of the retail with apartments. So this is my concern. When we did the Quinn, there was a lot of concern that it was not mixed use, it was apartments only. And I was on the planning board at the time, and we were reluctantly convinced that we should go forward because it was our first project. We needed to make a splash in the development community, and we thought this would generate, having more apartments would generate more retail and other non-residential uses along this corridor. And now what we're seeing a couple of years down the road, that isn't necessarily so. So my concern is that developers are always going to want to maximize profits. For the foreseeable future, they're going to want to do either all residential or they're going to want token retail and light industrial uses. Token, because that's what I see. And I worry about that. And I think that sometimes it might be better to either not do a development or to cut back on the residential. So in this particular case, was it considered that if we're giving up the retail uses, that we don't add residential, we just make the building one story lower so that it would be the same number of residences but less congestion? Is that considered at all? And is the administration interested in considering that?
Well, a couple of things related to what you're discussing, Councilman. Number one, I've gone on record saying that I would have started my planning for redevelopment in the flood zone. That's number one. Number two, the flood zone requires additional expenses on the burden on the part of the developer. We are still committed to retail on South Avenue. We continue to develop and reinforce those plans. I am also of the opinion that North Avenue is not ready for the kind of retail that we anticipate on South Avenue at this point in time. And so in dealing with the realities of what's going on in the environment, we do want to continue to increase residential density around the train stations. And so that is part of our plan. That has been an ongoing part of our plan. We are still committed to retail, mixed use, and standalone commercial on South Avenue. But we are talking about properties, and even in the flood zone on South Avenue, because we believe it's viable. Right now, that is not what is taking place on North Avenue. So our only option would be to leave it as is. And we've talked about needing additional tax revenue, which residential properties bring. And the more residential we do get around our train station, retail follows residential, we'll get some of that. We have some burdens that have been placed on us by DEP, and we're meeting those with the best solutions that we can possibly come up with.
So when you say increased development, residential development around train stations, are we defining that as a circle? And that's usually what you see?
Yes, it is.
Is it a half a mile or is it a mile? How do we define it?
We're defining it in the true transit village sense of the word, a half-a-mile radius around the train station.
So if it's beyond a half a mile on South Avenue and North Avenue, which is a very limited amount of space because we have 2 train stations, but there is space there. Are we committed to not doing residential in those limited spaces to avoid having residential all the way down from between each station?
We're not going to, and I did do a redevelopment forum recently, and
I
we
was out of
talked.
town,
Oh, sorry. I did do a redevelopment forum last week talking about South Avenue specifically, and the vision for South Avenue, which I don't really anticipate to be any different than as we move down the street on Fanwood and Scotch Plains and Cranford and Westville. There are multiplicity of uses that are on South Avenue in those towns. There's mixed use, there's multifamily, there's single family houses, there's standalone commercial. All of those uses are appropriate and really what we vision on South Avenue. I don't expect it to be all residential and I don't expect it to be all commercial.
We're going to have to be really careful to make sure it's not all residential.
Councilman Armati? Any questions?
Director, since this is what NJDEP, they categorize it as a flood zone, how difficult has it been for you to attract new, investors that are interested in developing in that area?
In that area, I can give you an example that several of us are going out actually to E. Paul site 525 South Avenue to see if we can come up with a solution that would get residents out of the flood zone for a mixed-use development. And we'll be meeting with our engineers, myself, Mr. Director Dabney, Director Childress, and Director Burgess. Probably we're going to come back with a solution that says it can't be done, but we are definitely trying to see if we can get residents out of that flood zone area. We've looked at one option that's already been rejected by DEP. We're looking at this other option to see if our emergency vehicles can still service our community. So it takes a lot of creative thinking on the part of a lot of our professionals to meet the requirements of DEP. And then a willingness on the part of the developer to invest. So for 829 South Avenue, we're building a bridge, kind of like a bridge from one property to the next, and it's costing the developer $2.5 million just for that solution. So yes, we have to balance everything. So with E. Paul, we might come back to you and say we can't do any residential there, that the best solution is to just do commercial.
Okay. And based on your research, and obviously if you're working with NGDP and this whole issue, when was the last time there was significant flooding in that area?
Yeah, DEP doesn't really care. They have to go by what FEMA says, and it's in the event of a 100-year flood. Their concern is that the public can get out safely. If you put residential in the flood zone, then we've got to come up with plans that demonstrate that we can do emergency evacuation of people out of a flood area in the event that it ever occurs.
But do we know the last time it flooded that bad?
I'd have to get that data for you. I know it's greater than 50 years. I just don't know the actual date. I'd have to get that data for you.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Thanks. Councilman Good.
Actually, no.
Councilman McCray.
No.
Councilwoman Davis.
Yes. So with MC 2019-26, we keep talking about increasing density. I feel like every month I come back with the same question. What is our goal? Like when do we know that we have enough and we've reached the density that we want?
I'd say we know when we have a South Avenue corridor that is fairly active for South Avenue, a corridor on North Avenue that is active, and a downtown that is active. Right now, we have a downtown and we have many redevelopment plans for downtown that brings density to downtown. So we'll know when we realize these redevelopment plans that we have in place.
So, I know you said we will know when we have an active downtown, but how do we measure that? So what are the measurables that say, okay, we've reached the density?
The measurables will be when the properties, the storefronts, where we have a low vacancy rate on storefronts on North Avenue, Front Street. Some of our main commercial corridors. We'll know when we have residential that is occupied. Many of the apartments above the stores currently are empty. And so we'll know when all of that begins to turn over. And some of it would be new structures, some of it will be rehab of existing structures, but it's utilization of those structures that we're concerned about.
Okay, if we can just receive what the vacancy numbers currently are and what's our goal to get to. Are we looking for 100% vacancy? 100% occupied, are we looking for 80%? And if we're at, I don't know, let's say 60% now, like, just so we can just have a comparison to know these things coming up.
Okay, the right number in my head is 95% occupied, 5% vacancy. But it's gonna take a lot to get there in terms of our downtown.
Okay, so again, I'm just requesting what our vacancy rate is for all of those, so for all of our transit-oriented development areas, just what that, I guess what that vacancy number is, so then we can see how far we have to go on MC 2019-27.
You want the vacancy rate for North Avenue, because that's what that one deals with.
If we can get them for all of them, because I feel like we always talk about the different transit-oriented developments at different times, so it'll just be great to have all of them to reference to.
Okay. So to get that number for you means that I have to have the manpower to go out and count every property in the major corridors, because Front Street is long. We talked about Route 28, it's fairly long. We talked about downtown. What we are focused on is the downtown area. You have a study before you today, TODD South, that the planning board heard last week. That's 125 properties that are either vacant, underutilized, or need some improvement. So we can get that data, but that means that somebody has to go out and inventory.
Oh, I don't need it tomorrow, so I'm willing to wait until we can have it done, but I would just
We'll add it
like
up
the
for the
data.
plans that we have, so we can give you that data, or the studies that we have already done.
That's fine, as long as I can just have a vacancy rate to reference. As far as MC 2019-27, I guess it's more of a question for Corporation Counsel or the clerk. So if the property owner moves from that property, how easy or hard is it for the next property owner to have that sign removed? Because the next property owner may not need a handicap sign in front of their house, and if they park there, they're gonna start generating tickets. So how easy or hard is it?
It would just simply take another ordinance to remove the sign. In this case, the resident does not have a driveway, and they're handicapped, so they're requesting a handicap parking spot directly in front of their house.
Right.
If they do move, it would require ordinance to remove the sign. Public Works would just go out there and remove it.
Okay. And then for bond 1269, so if I can just have, I guess, what we expect the ratables to be from all of these developments for the next, I guess, few years, to just, I guess, get a better picture of that spacing out over 3 or 5 years. If we know how much money is coming in, then I think that'll help make a better informed decision for the next meeting.
Thank you. Do we have consensus?
The date I gave you.
Do we have consensus to move these items to the agenda?
Yes.
I'd also like to take some time to acknowledge our distinguished Assemblywoman, Superwoman Linda Carter.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. Citizens are welcome to address their council at this time on any governmental items of concern, whether or not it's scheduled on the agenda above. during this portion of the agenda. A total of 60 minutes has been allocated for all public comments to be presented. If you wish to be heard, come to the podium, give your name and address to the clerk for the record. The amount of discussion on any single subject, as well as any time any single speaker is allowed, will be limited to 5 minutes. Large groups are urged to select someone to represent them. Thank you. You're up.
John E. Pritchard, formerly of 723 Arlington Avenue, Plainfield, New Jersey, now 410 Spruce Avenue, Garwood. We need to thank our sons and daughters of Plainfield who are serving in our armed services, our Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and Air Force. We failed to do that during the war in Vietnam. And during that time, we lost 16 men from Plainfield who were fighting for us. Those who survived who came home, they were called Nazis, murderers, baby killers. I'd like to see that word Nazi retired once and for all. It's just as bad as other word, which of course I repeat, will not use. The poor brave soldier there despised. Nor can him as a stranger. Remember, he's his country's stay in day and hour danger. And secondly, we need to reactivate Muhlenberg Regional Hospital. We need that hospital, and we need it very, very badly. What if another 9/11 attack occurs? We'll need that hospital very, very badly. And let's not forget, during September 11, 2001, nearly 3,000 of our own people lost their lives to terrorist attacks. The sooner after Muhlenberg, the better off we all will be. Don't make myself clear.
Seeing no others for public comment? Oh, no, spoke too soon.
Thank you. Maria and Sarah Watch on Avenue. Forgive me if my comment sounds as confused as Section 7, Section 3 was to me listening to it. I'm listening to an incident. I'm at the advantage of not knowing the incident or the individuals involved, and that's a good thing. So I just reacted on the innuendo of this hearing. The only thing that kind of rankled me, with all due respect, Councilwoman Davis, was that if the injured party was a woman, and the offender a male, that it should be different, it should be weighed differently. So I hope that's not what I heard. And I would like to add that I think Councilman Storch's comment about if a person is otherwise qualified, and if an incident occurs, which for that moment is unforgivable, I think a right to an apology is an okay thing, because that person's future behavior will show whether the apology was sincere. And we're all learning. I've been equally offended by male and female. I have done my share of offending. And I hope to think I've learned from every incident. So I felt the need to say that. Thank you.
Council President, if I may respond to the speaker?
Sure.
Thank you. So no, it's not because it was a male, it's more offensive. It's just the context of the conversation. And to Councilman Storch's point, no, she absolutely did deserve an apology. My point was that she does not have to accept that apology just simply because the offender says that it's sincere. But my reasoning for allowing it to go on the agenda was so that we can then have that time to then table it and really investigate it. And that's what I was hearing that Councilman Storch was suggesting. So thank you.
All right, can I have a motion to close public comment?
Second.
Okay, and can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Meeting adjourned.